I'm Gustavo Fuchs from Telesur English. Today we're joined by Dr. T.V. Paul from McGill University. He's an expert in international relations and global security issues. And we're going to talk about the Iran nuclear deal. Dr. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, my first question is, last month Iran reached a landmark deal after decades of a decade of negotiations with 5 of the most powerful countries in the world to develop its nuclear energy program. Can you tell us, what are the main features of that agreement and what does it imply for Iran?
Well, it is a 15-year agreement, and the agreement has several components. The most critical ones are that Iran will reduce its stockpile of uranium, enriched uranium in particular, and that it will focus on low enriched uranium for its civilian energy program, and that it will not develop centrifuges or heavy water needed for a weapons program. So it is not completely taking away Iran's capacity in the nuclear area, but it is reducing, if it is implemented properly, will reduce considerably Iran's capacity to develop a nuclear weapon in a short period, let's say 1 or 2 years' time. The second critical element is the inspection regime. International Atomic Energy Agency, headquartered in Vienna, will have quite a bit of access, inspectors, within Iranian facilities, and they will be monitoring what Iran does. Right now, they don't have that kind of monitoring ability, which will give them a lot of lessons as well as a lot of information, technical as well as other information on Iran's intentions and capabilities. Unless, of course, Iran does more clandestine activity, this deal has certain advantages. We can talk about it. Some disadvantages too, but no deal is perfect. As we know, international politics is all about compromises.
Well, a little bit in that same line of thought, what would be the advantages of the deal as it is right now?
The deal is giving an opening to Iran for the international community. And it is also first time you notice that all major powers plus Germany and other European countries are coming together and agreeing on this issue. Previously, they did not have agreement on some issues. The Russians wanted one thing or the Chinese wanted another. So in that sense, it is an example of great power cooperation, major power cooperation on a very pressing issue. The second advantage is that it definitely slows down Iran's options for nuclear weapons. It doesn't completely take away it, which may not be easy either way, because Iran is not a banana republic. It has the ability, if it really wants to go. So it's a choice that the Iranian leaders have to make. And so they have to factor in a number of variables. And one of them is whether they are going to benefit internationally by following this lead, economically. And I think their calculation is that by having this deal, they can gain the sanctions will be lifted, and they will get the money back, quite a bit of frozen in the US, $150 billion, which will help them quite a bit. Right now, the oil prices are down. Secondly, their oil and gas will be available on the international market. Some of the sanctions will be lifted. So a lot of economic benefits for Iran and for, of course, other Western companies that will be benefiting too. The other benefit is obviously making Iran a stakeholder in Middle East. Right now, Iran plays all kinds of games. Of course, it's against ISIS and the Sunni groups. But whether in the balance of power, emerging balance of power, Iran could be a constructive partner or a destructive partner, or a state, that is very critical. So the deal is not happening in a political vacuum. This is what is missing out in many of the discussions. It is happening in the context of regional changes taking place in the Middle East. And that includes the Islamists taking over many countries and the revolutions that are taking place. So Iran could play as a stabilizing force if they want to, okay, that's very critical. Or they can be a spoiler. And I do think that the deal will give more opportunities for the international community to engage Iran to play a constructive role.
Okay, now several experts have pointed out that Iran is not likely to be developing nuclear weapons right now, and that the probabilities are very low of that happening. However, we have heard Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu going on and on about how this represents the worst case scenario for Israel and that it threatens the existence of the Israeli state. Why do you think Israel is reacting in such a way?
First of all, the idea that they can threaten Israel's existence is not correct. Israel has at least 300 nuclear weapons. They can wipe out the entire Iranian state if they want. Of course, the Iranians attack first, preempt all the facilities the Israelis have, that's a different story. So the idea of a nuclear holocaust without Iran receiving anything in back, and the Americans also are watching that, no, is not correct. That means Netanyahu does not believe in nuclear deterrence. He's just keeping it for his power or prestige, his countries. So that is a wrong argument. The second problem is, left alone, Iran will have the capability in a year or two to have nuclear weapons. What is Israel going to do at that point? The worst scenario comes earlier than he thought that the other side has. So it is not clear whether Netanyahu's fears are warranted. Obviously, they have a history of Holocaust and the Jewish difficulties. A lot of anxieties, understandable, okay? But that is not sufficient to say that it is going to cause a war. The war cannot be won. The Israelis have thought about it. Americans have thought about it. Can you attack Iran, get rid of all their nuclear weapons, and then come free of troubles in the Middle East as what happened in Iraq? What are the consequences of it? So Netanyahu is kind of playing this both side game. He's domestically, this is a good way to show his hawk. Internationally also hoping to get the best deal. I don't know whether it is feasible to get anything more than this at this point. Obviously, if the deal is not approved by the US Congress and the presidential veto doesn't sustain, then there may be an opening. But at this point, Netanyahu's point of view is not supported by at least the majority of scholars and thinkers, because the alternatives are not there, easy ones, other than sanctions. And sanctions, after a period of time, run their courses. They don't necessarily sustain, and the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese will start now backing off if this deal doesn't go through. So sanctions can be busted. Okay, so there's a number of problems there. The Israelis have a serious challenge. But I think it would have been important to realize, to consider the Israeli point of view and try to encourage them also to think, come up with alternative solutions, which I don't think is happening.
Well, another reaction, an adverse reaction to the deal has been voiced by Saudi Arabia, which is a major player in the region. And basically, there have been accounts by Western media about officials, official sources, anonymous sources, claiming that Saudi Arabia will buy nuclear weapons from Pakistan anytime soon. How much credibility is there for these claims, and what would be the role of Saudi Arabia in this larger context?
Well, as you know, Pakistan helped Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia helped Pakistan to develop nuclear weapons, money-wise. And the AQ Khan network provided materials to Iran. And so there is some collaboration going on. But all indications are that the Pakistanis at this point are not going to give a nuclear weapon to Iran, as they know their credibility in the non-proliferation area is zero because of the AQ Khan problem. So they really will have a major crisis if they give a nuclear weapon and the United States finds it out. So
to Saudi Arabia.
To Saudi Arabia. I don't think the United States can support that without upsetting all the nuclear non-proliferation regime. One of the fundamental articles of the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, is that nuclear weapons will not be transferred to a non-nuclear weapon state. Of course, Pakistan is not a member of NPT, but it will still be violating that core principle. And so that option may be unlikely. Obviously, nothing can be impossible in the Middle East scenario. I think the Saudis are making a lot of noise, hoping to get, but officially they accepted that, they agreed with this deal. They know that it is better to slow down rather than accelerate the Iranian development, because they don't have a choice. They can do nothing about it, no? So obviously, for them also, it is better that we slow down Iranian abilities, and that over time, hopefully, Saudi-Iranian relations will improve, or some kind of rapprochement will take place. So I don't see Saudi Arabia can protect itself with nuclear weapons the way we think. It still need the help of the United States or whoever it is going to be supported. And Saudi Arabia going alone with the nuclear acquisition will generate considerable challenges to the region. UAE will be the next candidate, so the spread will get worse. But a working agreement with IAEA inspectors regularly monitoring and telling the world what the Iranians are doing will release some of these tensions that Saudi Arabia may be experiencing today.
And well, talking about a little bit, you mentioned it before about the U.S. and the fact that it's now currently being debated in Congress and in Senate, the nuclear deal, and also thinking about the balance of power in the region. What would be the implications if the nuclear deal is not approved by Congress, or if it is approved, thinking of U.S. policy in the Middle East?
I think it will have a major credibility problem for the United States, because it has agreed with all the European states and the P5 that it will support the deal, and that you cannot trust the United States, on this matter. The second point is we don't know what the reaction of the Iranians would be, whether they will be willing to come back for negotiations. At least in the short term, it is unlikely. They may do something to accelerate so that they can have a bargaining power. They will say that, And then the second problem that I notice is the hawks within Iran may regain power, upper hand, saying that, look, you cannot trust the United States. You cannot trust the Western countries. Therefore, we need to be tough, even though the consequences are there. So the domestic political implications are worse than anything else at this point. And the second challenge will be regional balance of power. Who will be able to maintain the kind of stabilizing force that potentially Iran could offer? Right now, the Middle East is unbalanced. We don't have a proper balance of power. We don't have states. We don't have non-state actors are running everywhere, the ISIS and other groups. And so, if we want to get a regional rapprochement, Iran is a pivotal player there. So, what will happen to all those processes if this deal falls through? So, I think that eventually it may pass through, because you still need 2/3 majority to override the veto. It's an executive agreement, it is not a treaty. That means the Congress doesn't have only up to so much power. But it is getting a lot more vicious debate, because it just so happened to be in the presidential election cycle. This is dangerous time in the US, because everybody will try to smash it, just trash it, because if they think it will score them a political point. And the vote is coming in September, and I would think the fall will be an intense period of political maneuverings here. But in the end, Obama has been lucky for the last few months. Several of these things we thought will fall through, including his Obamacare, came without being challenged by the Supreme Court, for instance. And the Congress also approved some of his measures. So I have a feeling it will go through. But the big question is how it will be implemented, whether there will be a lot of negotiations or disputes about the meaning of these clauses that they agreed upon. IAEA will have inspectors there, and whether countries will be able to threaten sanctions again, although that is part of the clause of the treaty, or the framework, without China and Russia trying to upset that too. So, and that will also be affected by the international politics of the day. So 15 years is a long time. And people don't realize that America may not be all that powerful 15 years from now. So we need international consensus for that reason alone. It's better to have some consensus built up on this, some regime built up on this, and that after 15 years, maybe whoever in charge of the world politics come together and say this is not a good idea. The Iranians should be part of the global non-proliferation regime.
So could we consider this deal as, let's say, a victory for the South, for China and Russia and their alliance in the international arena?
I don't think so, because it is probably the most feasible agreement. So there is no real victor in that sense, because it is not, negotiations always involve give and take. There's no one, unless of course one party is so powerful it can impose a settlement. See, that is the problem here. No one can impose a settlement on Iran. No one can impose settlement or ask the Chinese and the Russians to capitulate, So they have to get their side. And that way, it was impressive that they sat together for more than a month or month and a half and able to come up with something that reasonably good. 60, 70% good. 30% of course. So I wouldn't consider it as a victory for the Chinese or the Russians, but they could turn it around and say this is a victory. I don't think they have done that. If things get worse, it fails in the US Congress and the veto doesn't sustain, then you will have more intense negotiations and problems with that. But I wouldn't call it a victory for Russia or China. Of course, it could be if only they are the economic beneficiaries of this deal. But I think the Western companies are just waiting in the wings to get there. So let us see how it proceeds. It's very hard to say where Middle East politics, especially Iranian politics, is very, very hard to predict.
Well, thank you, Dr. Paul.
Thank you for having me.